Ex-wife receives an unexpected visit from ex-husband. Will their past destroy what's left of them? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Sarah had been living a quiet life since her divorce from David. It had been months since she last heard from him, and she had gotten used to the peace that came with being on her own. She found comfort in her daily routine, spending time with friends, focusing on her work, and slowly healing from the emotional wounds their marriage had left behind. But all of that changed one afternoon when she heard a knock on the door. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of who could be at her door. When she opened it, there stood David, her ex-husband, looking exactly like he did the last time she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, and with that familiar look of uncertainty in his eyes. Sarah froze. It had been a long time since she had seen him, and in that moment she wasn't sure what to feel. Anger, confusion, or something else entirely. David stood there for a moment, as if unsure of what to say, before finally speaking. I know it's been a while, he began, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The last time they had spoken, it hadn't ended well. They had argued, fought, and in the end, both walked away with broken hearts. The wounds from their past had never really healed, and she had spent so much time trying to forget him, to forget the hurt. But now, here he was, standing at her doorstep, asking for a conversation. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped aside and allowed him to enter. The silence that followed was deafening. She could feel the weight of the years of unresolved emotions between them. David sat down on the couch, his posture tense as he waited for Sarah to speak. But she remained silent, unsure of how to start. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah spoke. Why are you here, David? Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing. David looked at her, his eyes filled with regret and sorrow. I don't expect things to be the same, he said softly. I needed to see you. I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we went through, and I'm sorry. I don't know if we can fix what's broken, but I wanted to try. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long trying to move on, trying to put the past behind her. But hearing his words, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, made her question everything she thought she knew about closure. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. David's eyes softened, and he reached out, but Sarah pulled away. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But as they sat there in silence, both lost in their own thoughts, it was clear that something had shifted between them. Whether it was hope or regret, either of them knew for sure. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, could this unexpected visit be the beginning of something new, or would their past continue to haunt them forever? David's presence in Sarah's living room felt almost surreal. The air between them was thick with tension, a strange mix of regret, anger, and unspoken emotions. As he sat on the couch, Sarah could feel her pulse quicken. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was fine, that she had moved on, but now, with him sitting there, everything seemed to unravel. Her mind raced, torn between the urge to kick him out and the curiosity of hearing what he had to say. The silence stretched on, both of them unsure of how to break it. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice steady, though she could feel her emotions threatening to spill over. So you've been thinking about us? After all this time? She couldn't help the bitterness that crept into her voice. David met her gaze, his eyes soft and full of regret. I know I messed up, Sarah. I hurt you, and I'll never be able to fix that. But I need you to know that I've thought about us, about what we had, and I'm sorry. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah felt a pang of longing, the same longing she had buried deep inside after the divorce. But she quickly pushed it away. She wasn't ready to go back there. Not yet. Sorry doesn't fix everything, David, she said quietly, her gaze drifting to the window. It doesn't change the fact that we were miserable together. You were never there when I needed you, and I couldn't keep living like that. David's expression faltered, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. I know. I was selfish, and I'm sorry for that too. Sarah's heart softened, but the walls she had built around herself over the past months were not so easily torn down. You should have thought about that before, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it to him or to herself. David remained silent for a long while, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally he spoke again, his voice low. I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. But I did, and I can't change that. I wanted to try. I wanted to know if we could ever get past all of this. Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest, the same ache she had carried for so long. But she wasn't ready to let it consume her again. Not after everything. I don't know if that's possible, she said softly, the words feeling heavier than she intended. The pain from their past was still raw, still too fresh. I don't know if I can forgive you. David didn't look defeated, though. He looked determined, as if he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He stood up slowly and walked over to her, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Sarah. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to show you that I've changed. That I can be the man you deserved all along. His words were sincere, but Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to believe him. She had spent so many years hoping for change, only to be disappointed. She couldn't keep living like that, always waiting for something that might never come. But even as she stood there, torn between the past and the future, she knew this moment would stay with her. Could they really move past everything that had happened? Or was this just another chapter in a story that was already over? The room felt even more suffocating now that they were standing so close. Sarah could feel her heart beating faster as David's words echoed in her mind. A chance? A chance to what? To fix something that felt irreparably broken? She had spent years building a life without him, a life that felt stable and controlled. The idea of reopening that door was terrifying, and yet, there was a part of her that couldn't completely shut it. David was waiting for her answer, his expression full of hope, yet tinged with fear, as if he wasn't sure what he would find in her response. Sarah looked away, trying to gather her thoughts. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, lost in her own turmoil, before she finally spoke. I don't even know where to begin, David, she said, her voice quiet but steady. So much has happened. So much has changed. David nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. I know, he said gently. I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I can be someone you can trust again. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Could she trust him? Could she really allow herself to believe that he had changed, that the man who had once hurt her so deeply was truly different now? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had spent so much time fighting to protect herself, to keep her heart safe from more pain. Letting David back into her life seemed like a dangerous risk, one she wasn't sure she was ready to take. But at the same time, a small part of her wanted to believe that people could change, that they could grow and learn from their mistakes. She opened her eyes and looked at him, her gaze piercing yet hesitant. You really think things could ever go back to how they were? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David's face softened, and he shook his head slowly. No. I don't think things will ever go back to what they were. But I do believe that we can move forward. That we can start fresh if that's what you want. Sarah felt a twinge of something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. The idea of starting fresh, of building something new from the ground up, was both terrifying and exhilarating. And what if I'm not ready? She asked, her voice cracking just slightly. David took a step back, giving her the space she needed. Then I'll wait. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I'm here. I'll wait as long as it takes. Sarah wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to push him away, to shut the door and never look back. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the good times, the laughter they once shared, wanted to reach out and take his hand. But could she trust him again? Could she really allow herself to hope for a second chance? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that this moment, this unexpected visit from David, had opened up a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. And yet she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new. The evening wore on, and the conversation between Sarah and David showed no signs of ending anytime soon. They both sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet the weight of the unspoken words seemed to fill the room. David had stepped back, giving Sarah the space she needed, but he didn't leave. He stayed close enough, yet distant, his eyes never fully leaving her face. She had asked herself so many times over the past few years if she could ever see David in a different light. But now, with him here, all the answers seemed too far out of reach. She had spent so much time building her walls, her fortress of self-protection, that letting anyone, especially David, back in felt like an impossible task. But in the quiet of her living room, with the soft hum of the evening outside, something in Sarah shifted. She didn't know if it was hope, or simply the fear of being alone again, but the question lingered, what if they could really start over? The air between them had grown thick, filled with an unspoken tension that neither of them seemed ready to address. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke, her voice tentative, but steady. You said you wanted to show me that you've changed. David's eyes met hers instantly, and he nodded. I do. I want to prove to you that I'm not the same person I was when we were married. I've had time to think about everything, the mistakes I made, the things I took for granted. I know I can't take back the hurt, but I want to show you that I've learned, that I can be better. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she didn't look away. His words sounded genuine, and for the first time since he had walked through her door, she didn't feel as though she was just hearing empty promises. Still, the fear in her heart didn't go away. The fear of opening herself up, of getting hurt all over again. She had been through so much to rebuild her life, to make peace with the past. Could she really risk it all for another chance with him? How can I believe that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How can I trust that things will be different this time? David didn't hesitate. I know it's hard, Sarah. I don't expect you to just forgive me, not right away. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm here for you, not just for me. I'm here for us. Sarah looked at him, her heart heavy with doubt, and yet a flicker of something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she could be fine on her own. But deep down, she knew she had never fully let go of the person he used to be, the person she had once loved. I don't know what to do with all of this, Sarah confessed, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know if I'm ready to open that door again. David gave her a small, understanding smile. You don't have to decide right now, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, whenever you're ready. Sarah looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Could she really risk everything again? Could she let herself fall into that uncertainty once more? The past felt too fresh, the wounds still so tender. But as David's words settled in her mind, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about going back to what they had. Maybe it was about finding something new, something they could build together. The thought of starting over scared her, but the thought of living the rest of her life with the question of what if lingering in her mind terrified her even more. The following days passed slowly, and the tension that had once filled Sarah's home began to ease. David kept his word. He didn't push her, didn't rush her into making decisions. He simply remained in her life, steady and patient, like a constant presence that was both comforting and unsettling. Sarah found herself caught between two worlds, the life she had built without him, and the uncertainty of what might be if she allowed him back in. She tried to keep herself busy with work, her friends, and her routines, but every now and then, her thoughts would wander back to the conversation they had shared. Could they really start fresh? Was it possible to rebuild something from the ruins of their past? One evening, as Sarah was finishing up a late dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "I was thinking about you today. How are you feeling?" It was a simple text, but it made her heart skip a beat. She hadn't realized how much she had been avoiding him until that moment. She had been so focused on the fear of what could happen, on the pain of the past, that she hadn't even considered how much she still cared. She stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keys as she thought about how to respond. Her mind raced, torn between the desire to reach out to him and the fear of opening herself up again. Finally, she typed back, "I'm okay. Just trying to figure things out." She pressed send and sat back, staring at her phone, waiting for his reply. When it came, it was brief but reassuring. "Take your time, Sarah. I'll be here when you're ready." His words brought a small smile to her face, but the weight of everything still hung over her. The thought of trusting him again, of letting him in after all this time, felt like a monumental task. Yet, in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to think about it, she couldn't deny that there was a part of her that wanted to try. The next week, Sarah invited David to meet for coffee. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a step forward. When they met, the conversation was easy, almost like it used to be. There were no awkward silences, no heavy expectations. They talked about everything and nothing, the weather, a new movie they both wanted to see, their lives since the divorce. It felt normal, in a way that surprised her. But there were moments, brief but significant, when she saw something in his eyes, something more than just the man she had divorced. There was sincerity there, and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward together. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah realized that she wasn't as afraid as she had been before. The fear was still there, of course, but it wasn't as suffocating. Maybe, just maybe, they could create something new, something different from what they had before. Maybe they didn't need to go back to the past. They could build something entirely their own, starting from this moment. She wasn't ready to make any promises, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with David. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but maybe it was worth the risk. Maybe the love they once shared had a chance of being rekindled, not in the way it was, but in a new, more mature form. And maybe, just maybe, they could finally move forward together. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments and small steps forward. Sarah found herself thinking more and more about David, about the possibility of something new between them. She still wasn't sure what that would look like, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt when they were together. Their conversations were easy, and there was an undeniable comfort in simply being in his presence. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to laugh with him, to share those small, intimate moments that they once had. Yet, the lingering fear of what might happen if she allowed herself to hope too much still remained. She wasn't ready to forget everything that had happened, the pain, the frustration, and the emptiness that had followed their divorce. She couldn't just erase that. But something had shifted within her. She was no longer seeing David as the man who had hurt her. She was starting to see him as the person he was now, a man who had changed, who was trying, who was offering her something she never thought she would want again. One evening, Sarah invited David to her apartment for dinner. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt like a step in the right direction. She spent the afternoon preparing, trying to push aside the nervous flutter in her stomach. When he arrived, she was struck by how natural it felt to have him there. The conversation flowed easily, just like it had all those years ago. They talked about their lives, the things they'd done since their split, and the memories they shared from their time together. At times, it felt as though nothing had changed, but at other times, Sarah noticed how much they had both grown. David was quieter than he used to be, more reflective. There was a maturity in him that she hadn't seen before, and it both comforted and unsettled her. As the evening wore on, they sat together on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but filled with the weight of their unspoken thoughts. Finally, David spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day," he began. "About starting fresh. I know it's not easy, but I just want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll go at your pace, Sarah. I'm not rushing you into anything." Sarah looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. His words were sincere, and for the first time, she felt as though he truly understood the importance of taking things slowly. She wasn't ready to dive into a new relationship with him, but the idea of building something together, something real, was starting to seem less impossible. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm ready to call this a second chance, but maybe we can start by just being here for each other. No expectations. No pressure." David smiled, his eyes soft with understanding. "No pressure, I promise. We'll take it one day at a time." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Maybe this wasn't about jumping back into what they had before, but about creating something new, something built on trust and patience, not expectations or regrets. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to move forward together. And for Sarah, that was a hope worth holding on to. Weeks passed, and Sarah found herself in a new rhythm, one that included David but wasn't defined by him. They had settled into a comfortable routine of checking in with each other, sharing meals, and even taking small trips to the local park or cafe. They laughed more than they had in years, but Sarah still felt a sense of hesitation. She was taking it slow, just as she had promised herself, but the deeper she went into this new dynamic with David, the more she realized how much she still didn't know about him. He had changed, that much was clear. But so had she. And that was the most daunting part. She wasn't sure of who she was anymore when it came to him. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah invited him over for a quiet dinner. It wasn't anything extravagant, just some pasta and wine, but there was something about it that felt significant. As they sat together, eating and talking about everything and nothing, Sarah could feel the weight of the question that had been lingering in her mind for weeks. Could they really move forward? Or was this just an illusion of comfort, a false hope that masked the truth? As if reading her mind, David suddenly looked up from his plate, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a flutter through her chest. "I know we're taking it slow, Sarah," he said, his voice steady but filled with meaning. "But I want you to know, I'm in this for the long haul. I'm not going anywhere. If you're still unsure, that's okay. But I'm not giving up on us." His words were simple, but they hit her with the force of something much heavier. She had heard those words before, years ago, when they had first met, when they had made promises to each other. But back then those words had been filled with idealism, with dreams of a perfect future that had eventually crumbled. Now, though, they felt different. They felt real. Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know if I can ever be sure," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long convincing myself that I don't need you, that I'm fine on my own. But the truth is, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. I'm not the person I was when we were married, and I don't think you are either." David nodded, his expression softening. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to feel the same way you did back then. But I do hope that, over time, we can build something new. Something better. We don't have to rush. I just want you to know that I'm here for whatever you need." His words were both comforting and overwhelming. Sarah knew that he was right, that they didn't need to rush. But the thought of opening herself up completely to him again was terrifying. Could she trust him enough to take that leap? Or was she just setting herself up for more heartache? The evening passed in a quiet, peaceful lull, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was something subtle. Something that made her question whether this time, maybe, just maybe, they could get it right. As David left later that evening, Sarah stood at the door and watched him walk away, feeling the pull of something deeper than just affection. It was a sense of possibility, of something that could grow if given the time and space to do so. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. As weeks turned into months, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in herself. The walls she had carefully built around her heart were slowly starting to crumble, piece by piece. She was no longer just going through the motions of daily life, she was actually living it. And a part of her realized that David was a big part of that shift. He had always been a presence in her life, even after they had separated, but now, it felt different. It felt like they were building something new together, not just holding on to a fragile past. Their relationship was no longer about what they had lost, but about what they could still create. It was a strange and comforting feeling, but also a little terrifying. Sarah had spent so many years convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was better off alone, that to open herself up again seemed like a gamble she wasn't sure she was willing to take. But every time she was with David, something shifted. He was patient, never rushing her, never making her feel as though she had to make a decision before she was ready. And that patience was exactly what she needed. One afternoon, they decided to take a weekend trip together to a small cabin by a lake. It wasn't far from the city, just a few hours' drive, but the idea of getting away from everything felt like a breath of fresh air. It was a chance for them to reconnect without distractions, without the weight of their past hovering over them. As they settled into the cabin, Sarah realized just how much she had missed being in David's company. The quiet moments, the shared laughter, the feeling of companionship, it all came rushing back to her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. They spent the day hiking around the lake, enjoying the calm beauty of nature, and as the sun began to set they sat on the porch, watching the colors of the skies shift from orange to pink to purple. There, in the quiet of the evening, Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. "I've been scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that I'm still not ready to let go of the past. Scared that if I trust you again, I'll just end up getting hurt." David turned to her, his gaze soft but steady. "I understand, Sarah. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I can be the person you need me to be. No rush, no pressure." Sarah smiled faintly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I think I'm ready to try," she said quietly. "I don't know what it will look like, but I want to. See where this goes." David reached out, taking her hand in his. The simple gesture felt like a promise. Not a promise of perfection, but a promise of trying, of growing together. It wasn't the grand gesture that she had once dreamed of, but it was real, and for Sarah, that was enough. As the evening drew to a close, and they sat together in the quiet of the cabin, Sarah realized that sometimes, the hardest thing wasn't letting go of the past, it was allowing yourself to embrace the future. And with David by her side, maybe, just maybe, that future wouldn't be as daunting as she had once thought. Months passed, and Sarah and David's relationship began to take on a new shape. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was real. They continued to build something together, one small step at a time. They learned to navigate their past, acknowledging the mistakes, the hurt, and the lessons learned, but they refused to let it define them. Every day was a choice, choosing to move forward, choosing to trust, choosing to give each other the space to grow, both individually and as a couple. There were still moments of doubt, of uncertainty, but they no longer lingered as heavily. Sarah had learned to open herself up again, little by little. She had come to realize that it wasn't about forgetting the past, but about creating something new from the pieces that were still left. David, too, had grown. He had shown her that change was possible, that people could evolve if they were willing to put in the effort. And Sarah had come to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, watching an old movie they both loved, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The house was quiet, the lights dim, and everything felt right. David turned to her, his expression soft. "I'm glad we're here," he said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. Sarah smiled, her heart warm. "Me too," she said, her voice steady yet full of meaning. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight of everything that had led them to this moment. They had both come a long way, and while they weren't exactly where they wanted to be, they were exactly where they needed to be. Together. There were still challenges ahead, still moments where the past threatened to resurface, but they faced them with a new understanding, a new commitment to one another. They knew that love wasn't always easy, but they had found a way to make it work. And as they sat together, side by side, Sarah realized that sometimes the best things in life aren't perfect, but they're worth fighting for. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that they could continue building a life together, that they could create something beautiful from the foundation they had laid. And in that moment, with David beside her, Sarah knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.